Now, every year when we go to Nicaragua, you see poverty. It's all around you. And as I look back on my life, I remember kind of the first time that I saw poverty. I was just out of 8th grade, between 8th grade and 9th grade that summer there. My parents spent a month in Nigeria. And my dad's a dentist, and so he went to fill in at a dental clinic there. And so this, me at 13, I did not have a beard at that time. I know many think I was born with a beard. I was not, in fact. I was a clean-shaven 13-year-old who went down to Nigeria. Now, Nigeria is in Africa. Nicaragua is in Latin America, all right? So just so you're welcome to pull out Google Maps and figure out which is where. And I remember the first time I saw a mud hut and a thatched roof. And we're driving on a freeway from the airport about 2 to 3 hours to the city where we're going to be staying. And you see this picturesque, beautiful little mud huts, circular mud huts with a thatched roof, and it looked like National Geographic. I mean, that's what it looked like. And so my first experience with poverty was more as a tourist. I was like, wow, that's interesting. And as we were there for a couple of weeks, our last Sunday there in Nigeria, we were invited to church, and then we went to somebody's home after church for lunch. And actually, I was beginning to get sick, and so on the way from church to lunch, I actually threw up in the cornfield, so that was interesting. And it actually saved me from that day from eating Nigerian food. I got to just eat the white rice because what they put before me, my 13-year-old palate was not ready for. Now, when my mother makes Nigerian food, it's like a highlight meal, so I love it. But at that point, I wasn't ready for it. But I remember walking into this home, which again was a collection of these mud huts and thatched roofs, and you go through into the back, and there's a little courtyard, and back there it's an open hut, and there's wood burning, and there's a couple of stones set up, and they have a pot on there, and that is where lunch is being made. And then we go back to what would be the dining room, but the dining room also doubled as a bedroom, and so some people sat on the bed, which was just a metal frame with a little spring on it, and we sat on the floor and we had lunch together. Me, my white rice, and my mom and dad were eating other much more interesting things than I was. And I remember as a 13-year-old thinking, wow, these people are happy. Wow, they're smiling, they're joyous, they're happy people. And I grew up in Livermore, and I literally remember in 8th grade having an argument with one of my class members about whether or not my dad's car was more expensive than his dad's car. Come on, I'm 13 years old, so give me a break, all right? But that was kind of the mindset you're coming from. And I go to somebody's home, and my bedroom in Livermore had more things than their whole house did for several children. And yet there was a joy there. There was a happiness. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, even without things, they're happy. And it began to kind of reorient the way I look at possessions and the world. And the year after that, my parents actually decided to go be missionaries. And so after my freshman year in high school, we moved to Nigeria, and we lived there for 3 years. And there's a ton of stories that I have about that, which I will not tell you all today. But a couple of interesting things happened. One, the poverty became the backdrop to life. That was just our world. And it was around you. You'd go to the market, and there were beggars, there was poverty, and that was just part of life. And during the summers, I would go out into the villages with my dad where he would do his dental work. And you'd walk around and kind of just watch life and sleep in their homes, and that was just what life was. But there's a couple stories that stand out, but one that I still remember today, and it really kind of started to shift the way I saw things. And we had a gardener at our house, and his name was Sunday. They chose that name because he was born on Sunday. So that's what Mom chose. So that was Sunday. And he's probably 6 years older than me. And we'd hang out occasionally and do stuff together. But he would also work at our house. And one day, my mom saw Sunday walking by. And he had like 3 like mouse tails hanging out of his shirt pocket. And of course, that's unusual here in the U.S., but it was unusual in Nigeria as well. So my mom said, Sunday, what's going on? Why do you have mouse tails hanging out of your shirt pocket? And he said, well, look, I was in the generator room and I saw where the mice ran, and so I created this mouse trap, which was a noose, and as soon as a mouse would run in it, it would spring up and it would kill the mouse. And he said, well, this is going to be my dinner tonight. And though he was amazingly ingenious to create the mousetrap, I think what struck me is it became reality that they say they eat only corn mush for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they say that you only have meat once or twice a year. But when you see your friend, somebody who is your acquaintance, eating and happy, he was not upset that he was having mouse for dinner that night. That was actually a pretty cool thing. Like, hey, I'm getting meat tonight. You begin to understand that poverty is something that is all around us and is something that affects people all over this world. And it's something that, as North Americans, sometimes it's hard for us to touch and feel and connect with. But that started to shape how I saw the world and how I saw poverty. Now, I tell you these stories, but I think all of us in this room, we have a touch point that actually will connect with my experiences in Nigeria and Nicaragua. And some of you have probably not been to Africa, and some of you have probably not been to Latin America. But there's something that goes on right in our valley that as soon as I say the word, a couple of things will happen. One, a picture is going to pop up in your mind. You'll have a picture like, oh, yeah, I see that. I know that. You'll have an opinion. You'll have a conception, a preconceived idea, maybe a misconception. I don't know. We're not going to address that this morning. But you'll have ideas, and I guarantee that everybody in this room, when I say it, you will go, hey, that's something that's not good in our community that we should do something about. And also, I will guess, because you're probably like me, that most of us aren't doing anything about it, but we have opinions about it. And it's homelessness here in our valley. Now, as soon as I say the word homeless, you got a picture in your mind, right? I picture a little tent under an overpass right over under 280. That just, for whatever reason, that's the one that comes to my mind. And I have ideas about how people ended up homeless, whether or not I'm correct or not, I don't know. And I think that maybe our city should do more things, and I think maybe our church should do more things. But at the end of the day, it's such a huge and complex issue that often it pushes us into inactivity. I'll often say, people much smarter than me have worked on this problem before, and they have not come up with a solution. And so it's a reason for me to just go, well, you know what? Maybe there's nothing I can do about it. Or maybe it's so big that I won't do anything about it. There's that question, fill in your blank here, is what do we do with systemic poverty? What do we do with systemic poverty? And we realize the complexities and the enormity, and it can lead us towards apathy. I think another piece to this is that we can insulate ourselves from it. We can put it out of our mind to the point that it just doesn't really bother our world anymore. When I lived in Nigeria, we lived in a compound. I literally had 8 to 10 foot brick walls around us with metal along the top to essentially insulate us from the world outside. Now, don't get me wrong. We were not living in opulence. On the other hand, when I drove through that gate, I was insulated from the poverty around me, from the reality of the world around me. And the same happens to us here, right? So I live downtown. And so every day when I come to work, I get on South 10th Street, and I take the 280 on-ramp onto the 10th Street on-ramp onto 280. And right in front of me, so I'm stopped at the stoplight, right there is a homeless person. I don't think I've ever seen the person, so I don't know if it's a male or a female, but there's a homeless person. he or she has a tent set up. They're under a tree. They used to have a street sign there. Like, they have a pretty cool setup. I'm looking like, man, that's not too bad of a setup. I see it every day, and every day something in my mind goes, oh, man, that's too bad. Man, I wonder what their story is. I wonder what. But I'll tell you something. As soon as I take a right-hand turn onto the on-ramp, you know what my first thing is? My next thing I'm thinking of? Okay, what lane do I get in? Because the lights are on up at the top, and I got to make sure that I definitely get on before the guy behind me, and maybe I can beat the guy in front of me so that I'm the first one on the freeway. I am thinking more about the lane to get into than the homeless person within about 2 seconds, because, come on, I got to save the extra 12 seconds if I get in the wrong lane. And, dude, that guy got on before me today. That's terrible. We insulate ourselves from the plight around us. And so I think we would all agree that global poverty, not a good thing. Homelessness in our valley, not a big thing. But it is a big thing, but it's so big that it sometimes leads to this inaction. So here's what I'd like to do today. I'd like us to open our Bibles. So turn to the book of John. We're going to go to John chapter 5. And I think there's a story that gives us a little bit of a framework. Maybe a framework for how we can act. It doesn't really tell us what to do, but it tells us how we can do it. So turn to John chapter 5. And I'm going to read this. We're going to start at verse 2. This is a story about Jesus. He's in Jerusalem. And it's actually a story that might be recognizable to many of you. It is a fun story. The last 2 verses, we just grab onto because it's victory verses. And so read along with me. It goes like this. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, and we love this, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. And when we read those last 2 verses, we're cheering. Like, that's my God. He can take somebody who's been paralyzed for 38 years and heal them. And don't give me no excuses about why you can't get well. Just pick up your mat and go. And we're like, yeah, that is my Jesus. We love the end of the story. But I'd like us to look at the previous verses because I think it will maybe illuminate or show us a little bit something of a way that we can handle some of the big situations around us. So let's start with, it's in Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem is the cultural, religious, and political center of Israel. If you wanted to be in the middle of things, you were in Jerusalem. That's just where you had to be. If you were the religious type, you were there. If you're the political type, you were there. If you wanted to be, the further you got away from Jerusalem, the further out into the country you were. Okay? And so Jerusalem was the center of things. Not unlike our own valley, which if you want to be in the center of technology, the center of innovation, you come to the Silicon Valley. This is where it happens. And so that's what's happening here in Jerusalem. Now, there's these actually 2 pools. The pool of Bethesda, it looks like from archaeology, there's 2 pools, and then they had these colonnades or these arbors to give shade on either side, and then one down the middle. So there were 5 of these colonnades, a place where people could hang out and be there. And it was an interesting place because there was a legend about it, right? We read that where it says when the water gets stirred, the legend was that an angel would stir the waters. And the first person into the water got healed. So, actually the word Bethesda means pool of mercy. And so this pool of mercy was a place where people who needed hope, people who needed mercy, people who were sick and disenfranchised, this is where they would come. Now, what did the rest of society think about this place? I don't think they liked it. Let me tell you why. First off, there's this mystical legend about that place, and that's not going to settle well with the religious type. Secondly, there was this idea that if you were sick, it was because either you or a family member, a parent, a grandparent did something wrong. You sinned. You rebelled against God. And as a punishment for that, you were sick. You were hurt. So there was a reason why you were there. And it wasn't because you had done good. It was because somebody in your family had done bad. And so also in the Jewish religion, if you touched a sick person, especially somebody with open sores or something like that, you would become unclean. And so now, if you become unclean, that means you have to go through all kinds of religious ceremonies and be separated from your family in order to be clean again. And so you have this place, which was probably not a place where the religious or polite society would want to get anywhere near. It's that place where, hey, all the sick people go there. And there was preconceived ideas of how they got there and what was going on in their lives. And it was this place that you wouldn't want to go. Not unlike, actually, maybe a place in our own society, right? Where we have preconceived ideas about what might be happening in an encampment, what might be going on there, why people ended up there. This community at the Pool of Bethesda was likely disenfranchised, ostracized, and on the fringes of society. All right, so that's some background on it, but now let's look at this story. All right, so kind of giving you a framework, picture of what we have there. Now let's insert Jesus into the middle of this group of people who were sick, people who were hurting, people who are on the outskirts of society, and Jesus inserts himself into this situation. So Jesus is there, and it looks like he's talking to people, asking people, hey, what's that person's story? Hey, what happened to you? Tell me about your story, and trying to just find out what's going on in the community. I actually pictured Jesus maybe talking to one of the leaders in the community. Maybe there's somebody who kind of was a little bit higher up on the pecking order, and there's Jesus talking to them and asking questions about that community of sick and disenfranchised people. And as the stories go on, Jesus hears a story about the guy who had been paralyzed for 38 years. Now, from here on in, I'm going to call that guy 38. See, Jesus hears about number 38. He hears about 38, and he says, I'm going to go help that guy. I picture Jesus winding his way through a sea of sick people, maybe even having to step over somebody because they're in the way. But looking at people probably going, oh man, you need to really work on that bandage, man. You're getting an infection there. And oh, wow, yeah, hey, it's good to see you again. Are you getting any better? No, sorry about that. And keeps on walking through until he gets to 38. And then he has this conversation with 38 and says, hey, what's going on, bro? Oh, man, I can't get down there. Every time I try to go down there, somebody gets down there before me, and it's just not working out. And Jesus says, come on, enough of the excuses. Pick up your mat and walk. You see, when Jesus went down there, he could have gone down, I don't know how many people were there, 50, 100, 500, 1,000. And he literally could have cleared that place out that day, right? He could have said, hey, everybody, you're healed. Let's get out of here. There's other sick people who need to come in here and hope the angel shows up. So I'm going to clear out the Pool of Bethesda today. But he didn't do that. He didn't clear it out. He could have healed everybody there. In fact, people, whoever he was talking to and finding out stories, he probably left that person there still sick. And he walked over to the one and said, hey, 38, you got to get out of here today. And he healed the person and then walked away. Now, I think for us, we have a Pool of Bethesda all around us where there's an issue that we look at, whether it's global poverty, whether it's hunger in the U.S., whether it's homelessness. You pick the subject. They're huge, large, complex issues that governments are working on, that banks are working on, that nonprofits are working on. And we look at it and go, what could I possibly do that all of these people can't figure out? And I think part of the answer is in this story. There's some of you in this room who you are dedicating your life to ending homelessness or ending global hunger and those things. And God bless you for doing that. Honestly, the fact that God put that on your heart and you've chosen to follow that path, thank you. Please keep doing it. That is awesome. But for the rest of us who don't spend their days thinking about global poverty and homelessness and these types of issues. I think for us, we need to go find the one. Who is the one in your community that needs hope? Who is the one at your workplace that needs hope? Who's the one, maybe that person that's always out in front of 7-Eleven asking you if you have any change? Same person. Have you ever stopped and just said, hey, where were you born? Where'd you grow up? Start a conversation. My guess is you won't have to ask how he or she got there. If you asked a few questions, and all of a sudden maybe you'd begin to understand a little bit more about their story. A person in our church, probably 2 years ago now, this kid with like 4 dogs and an RV crossed his path, homeless or living in an RV. And this person in our church took it as his goal to just come alongside and help this kid get his RV fixed. Find a place where maybe he could stay that would allow him to have dogs. Get him some food. And he helped that one. He came alongside that one. This person just came across his path. And he endeavored to help move him forward in his life. Who's that one person that you can extend hope to? Kind of a concept that maybe you want to use here is do for the one what you want to do for the many. Do for the one what you'd want to do for the many. My computer made me change my password this week, and so it's not in the memory of my hands yet. So, normally I can just bang this out. Sweet, I got it. Okay. Do for the one that you would do for the many. Jesus chose to help one person among many. And we can extend hope to one person as well. What would it be like if everybody in this room, we probably have 200 or so people in here today, what would happen if everybody in this room extended hope to one person? Is there somebody in your workplace that is having a really tough time right now? And maybe tomorrow you just need to take them out to lunch and just listen. Or maybe there's somebody in your neighborhood who's, maybe they've lost a job, or they're elderly and they can't do maybe some of the things they used to be able to do, and their yard's getting overgrown, or they're not able to cook as well. And maybe you can do something to help that one person. There's a group of people that go to a homeless shelter and cook meals once a month in our church. Maybe that's something that you could do to help people. In a few months, we're going to help somebody who they cannot repair their house, and they need somebody to come alongside and help them with their home repairs. Maybe that's something that you can step into and go, man, I can help that one family. Do for the one what you want to do for the many. I think if everybody in this room, if we all went out and we found that one person in our community to help, that one person in your neighborhood, that one person at your workplace, that one person sitting out in front of 7-Eleven or in the VTA station or wherever it might be, and we stopped and we helped and we extended that hand of hope, it would start to transform our community. You see that 138, that one guy, that one encounter with Jesus transformed his life. 38 years paralyzed, and now I'm walking. That person's life was different. And the same is true for you and I. You see, Jesus gives us hope, and he wants us to extend that hope back out. I can't tell you who you need to give hope to, but I want to encourage you as followers of Jesus, as somebody who looks at huge problems in our own community, in our own globe, our own world, to stop and say, I can do one thing. That's why we support Compassion Kids. It's one kid at a time. That's why we go to the farm and help one kid at a time out on the farm in Nicaragua to get out of their plight. Probably in my lifetime, I will not help to eradicate poverty on a global scale. But I will do everything I can to help one person at a time as I go along my way. Would you all pray with me? Lord God, we come before you this morning. And we just thank you for the hope that your Son Jesus gives us, for the life that he gives us, for the healing that he gives us, for the grace and the mercy that he gives to us. Lord, I pray that we can extend that to others, that we can give that out in the way you have given it to us. Thanks, Lord, for what you're doing in Nicaragua. Thanks for what you're doing right here in San Jose. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.